My name is Elizabeth Castillo. I'm a sophomore from Oakton High School, and my science fair project is on the effect of modified crosswalk systems on people with disabilities. The discrimination faced by people with disabilities in walking systems increased the number of fatalities. A study by Georgetown University suggests more than 75% of crashes involve a wheelchair user. The purpose of the experiment is to accommodate the largely neglected disabled community with a modified crosswalk. According to the CDC, 26% of the U.S. population is disabled. 13.7% have a mobility disorder, and 2 out of 5 65 or older adults have a disability. This topic was chosen due to my grandparents' difficulty seeing crosswalk signals that had no sound when to cross, my curiosity and science to assist me. The rationale of the motion sensor crosswalk is to develop a no-touch crosswalk, which is convenient and accessible for all. Though it has a push button integrated with accessible pedestrian signals, the focal point for my motion-activated crosswalk would be the sensor, and its sound would replace the push button. Past examples include the changes of flooring, which may not be accessible for all visual impairments, and staggered crosswalk designs, which may be difficult for handicapped and paraplegic individuals. The hypothesis for the created sensor is if the median distance from the sensor and the object is calculated every 50 centimeters for 12 trials on whether motion is detected by the sensor, then the fourth trial will be the notable shift where the sensor will not distinguish movement. Its following research question is how may next generations create a modified crosswalk that accommodates all citizens? The subject is the developed motion sensor. The independent variables that follow are the sensor's sensitivity adjustment when identifying movement, and its dependent variables being the distance from the object to the sensor and whether it detected motion. This is measured every 50 centimeters for 12 trials. Lastly, its constants are the sensor's placement, the tape measure, the air conditioner sound, and the sensor's volume. The design for the sensor began with a necessary examination for people with disabilities when crossing. Then sensors were analyzed, targeting ones with farther ranges for detecting movement. With the previous research, a sensor with all the requirements of distance and adjustments for movement while still looking presentable was devised. The model had been rebuilt 4 times. The first had no charge, which meant the wires had no electrical current, so a battery pack was included. Then the second was due to the jumper cables having no socket for the other plugs, resulting in changing the cables with wires, which were difficult to place onto the breadboard, making the presentation look untidy. The third was due to the number of red wiring added onto the board, thus having them removed. The fourth and finalized sensor was from the jumper cables being able to remove the plug, which meant they could become a socket, meaning previous cables were replaced, having it look presentable, so much so that the sensor was moved onto the box for safekeeping. Continuing, the speaker and the relay module had come up with different components that needed, so both had to be programmed for the speaker to have a crosswalk sound and for the relay module to have an accommodated time delay for the motion activation. Now able to focus on the hypothesis, the time delay was measured using a stopwatch, and from the beginning of switching the battery pack onto the moment the sensor began playing sound, the sensitivity would change from the positioning of the screw, left, down, or right. The distance and sound on whether it detected movement was measured by placing a tape measure onto the floor and moving, waiting for the sensor to react. A step would be taken every time the sound was repeated. From this evidence, the new research was evaluated and developed onto focusing data and graph points. Finally, the findings were added onto the sensor. As viewed from the table, a comparison between the object's distance from the sensor resulted in the farthest detection being 350 centimeters. From this graph, it's clear to say that the sensor may detect from 3.5 meters, unlike the hypothesis' prediction of the signal ending at 200 centimeters, better known as the fourth trial. The information was collected by placing a measuring tape on the floor, and every moment that the sensor made the crosswalk noise to take the moving object 50 centimeters back until the sound finished. On another note, for the effect of sensitivity adjustment on time delay, the line graph reveals the range by calculating the number of seconds the sound is delayed from changing the sensitivity adjustment. The sensitivity adjustment is dictated from the phase change of the screw from either left, down, or right. For example, the left phase shown on the pie chart, 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5 seconds each appeared for 10% of the trials. However, 1.7 seconds appeared for 20% of the trials. The average in seconds for the trial pie charts are left being 1.58, right is 1.93, and down is 2.15 seconds. Both charts are determined by changing the screw onto different sides of the motion IR sensor body module in the repeated trials. As found from the previous experiments and its graphs, the sensor at its farthest distance can detect motion up to 350 centimeters, and the sensitivity adjustment affects the seconds of the time delay when movement is recognized. The most significant difference from the hypothesis theory was the sound ending on the 8th trial rather than the 4th during the effect of distance on the motion sensor reactant sound. In comparison to current crosswalks, which rely on traffic accumulation for the traffic light to change, the presented motion sensor would focus on pedestrian movement. Due to the differential steps for each item within the sensor, there were many uncertainties, such as the sensor's location. Wires and jumper cables began to loosen due to its transportation. Another factor were the citations no longer allowing student access, which resulted in a new hypothesis with further research. As shown from the hypothesis, it assists the maximum amount for distance for pedestrians when detecting movement, and with newer technology and generations, a modified no-touch motion sensor crosswalk with regards to age and disability is possible. With the knowledge of preferred distance, obstacles such as traffic routes, traffic lights, and intersections may be individually adapted, which may help familiarize the entwinement between crosswalks and disabled people. Additional improvements to future crosswalks include the time-based coordination control becoming second-hand to pedestrian movement, and crosswalks for people with disabilities becoming normalities since it would enforce public safety. Continuing, the obstacles surrounding push-button integrated APS revision, such as unfamiliarity with truncated domes, and Title II of the ADA, which mandates accessibility in crosswalks. Lastly, these are my references. Thank you so much.